The digital clock on my bedside table read 3:17 a.m. when the phone rang, a shrill, intrusive sound that sliced through the heavy silence of my Chicago brownstone. At 72 years old, I knew that a call at this hour was never a social invitation. It was a harbinger of disaster. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window panes with the ferocity of a mid-February blizzard. But the chill that gripped my chest had nothing to do with the weather. I fumbled for the receiver, my hand trembling slightly not from age, but from an instinct honed over 40 years as a federal prosecutor. I knew, even before I answered, that my retirement was about to end. "Grandma." The voice was barely a whisper, a fragile, broken sound that made my heart stop. It was Leo, my 17-year-old grandson. "Leo?" I sat up, ignoring the stiffness in my joints, switching on the lamp. The yellow light flooded the room, but it did nothing to dispel the darkness I felt coming through the line. "What is it? Where are you?" "I'm at the 19th District Station, on Addison." He paused, and I heard a jagged intake of breath, the sound of a boy trying desperately not to cry. "She hurt me, Grandma. Isabella hit me. She used the heavy brass statue from the foyer, but she told the police I attacked her, and Dad is standing right there, nodding. He believes her. He won't even look at me." A cold, white-hot fury flooded my veins, sharpening my senses instantly. The fog of sleep evaporated. This was not the panic of a helpless grandmother. This was the calculated rage of Margaret Vance, the woman who had once stared down cartel leaders in a courtroom without blinking. "Listen to me, Leo." I kept my voice low, steady, an anchor for him to hold on to. "Do not say another word. Not to the officers, not to your father, and absolutely not to that woman. Do you understand? You invoke your right to counsel. I am coming." I hung up and moved with a speed that belied my years. I dressed in thick wool trousers and a cashmere sweater, pulling on my heavy coat and leather gloves. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for my briefcase, the worn leather satchel that contained my Bar Association credentials and a lifetime of legal leverage. As I stepped out into the biting wind to hail a cab, the snow swirling around me like angry ghosts, I made a silent vow. Isabella Thorne had made a fatal miscalculation. She had mistaken my silence for weakness and my age for irrelevance. Tonight, she would learn that some predators never lose their teeth. The police station was a sensory assault of fluorescent lights, the smell of stale coffee, and the low, miserable hum of human trouble. I walked through the double doors, my heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the linoleum floor. The desk sergeant, a thick-set man named Kowalski with a face carved from granite, looked up. He was about to dismiss me, to tell me to take a seat, when his eyes narrowed. Recognition dawned, and his posture straightened instinctively. "Miss Vance? I haven't seen you since the Ricci Rico case. I need to see my grandson, Sergeant. Leo Vance, now." Kowalski hesitated, glancing toward the secure hallway. "It's a domestic dispute, Counselor. The parents are in with Detective Miller. The kid is in the holding area. They're talking about pressing charges. Aggravated assault on a family member. It's messy." "Get Miller out here," I commanded, my voice cutting through the din of the station, "and bring me my grandson. If anyone has questioned him without legal representation present, I will have their badge and their pension by morning." Moments later, I saw them. My son, Jonathan, stood near the vending machines, looking pale and defeated, his expensive suit rumpled, his posture slumped as if the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. Beside him stood Isabella. She was a vision of carefully constructed victimhood. Her blonde hair was slightly disheveled, just enough to suggest distress, but not enough to look truly messy. She held an ice pack to her forearm, her eyes wide and glistening with unshed tears. She looked fragile, beautiful, and utterly terrified. It was a perfect performance. And then there was Leo. A uniformed officer led him out from the back, my heart fractured into 1,000 pieces. His right eye was swollen shut, a dark purple hematoma blooming across his cheekbone. There was a deep cut on his lip and dried blood on his t-shirt. When he saw me, the facade of the brave teenager crumbled. He looked like the little boy who used to hide behind my legs during thunderstorms. "Grandma," he choked out, his voice cracking. I pulled him into a hug, feeling his slender frame shaking violently against me. I whispered into his hair, smelling the metallic scent of blood and the salt of tears. "I have you. You are safe. Mother." Jonathan's voice came from behind me. It was weak, pathetic. "You shouldn't be here. This is a family matter." I turned slowly, releasing Leo but keeping a protective hand on his shoulder. I looked at my son, the boy I had raised to be a man of honor, the man who had built a tech empire, now reduced to a puppet. Then I looked at Isabella. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, the mask slipped. I saw the calculation, the cold assessment of a threat. Then she blinked, and the weeping victim returned. "He pushed me down the stairs, Margaret," Isabella sobbed, her voice trembling with a theatrical vibrato. "I tried to discipline him because he came home high again, and he just snapped. He's dangerous." "Jonathan, tell her." I looked at Leo. "Were you high?" "No, Grandma. I was studying at Ben's house. I came home at 10. She was waiting in the dark. She started screaming that I was ruining her marriage. She picked up the heavy brass sculpture from the foyer table and swung it. I fell, and then she started hitting herself against the railing to make bruises." "Liar!" Isabella shrieked, clutching Jonathan's arm. "He's lying, John. He's sick." Jonathan couldn't meet my gaze. He stared at the floor, a man drowning in confusion. "Mom, please. Isabella is hurt. Leo has been difficult lately. Maybe some time in a facility would help him straighten out." Isabella found a place in Utah, a therapeutic boarding school. The silence that followed was deafening. I stepped closer to my son, invading his personal space until I could smell the scotch on his breath. "A facility?" I repeated, my voice barely a whisper, yet echoing with menace. "You are talking about sending your son, your own flesh and blood, to a juvenile detention center because this woman says so? Look at his face, Jonathan. Look at the angle of the blow. That wasn't a fall. That was a strike from a blunt object. If he had pushed her down the stairs, she would have broken bones, not just bruises on her arm that looked suspiciously self-inflicted." Detective Miller, a man I had cross-examined countless times in my career, approached us. He looked tired. "Margaret," he said respectfully but firmly, "it's he said, she said. But Mrs. Vance has visible injuries consistent with her story, and the boy has no witnesses. The father supports the wife's statement." "Then release him into my custody," I said, "pending an investigation. Unless you want me to call the district attorney right now, I believe he's still Harold Ford, who owes me his career, and ask why a minor with severe facial trauma hasn't been taken to a hospital yet." Miller sighed, rubbing his temples. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I would burn the precinct down with litigation if I had to. "Fine. He goes with you. But don't leave the city. And if he comes near the house, I'll arrest him myself." As I guided Leo toward the exit, I paused next to Isabella. She was dabbing her eyes with a tissue, watching us with a look of triumph. I leaned in close, my voice a whisper meant only for her, a sound like dry leaves skittering on pavement. "You have awakened a sleeping giant, my dear. Enjoy your victory tonight. It will be the last one you ever taste." The ride back to my apartment was silent. The city lights blurred past us, streaks of neon in the snow, reflecting the chaos in my mind. Once inside the warmth of my home, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. I led Leo to the kitchen, sitting him on the counter just as I had done when he was a child with a scraped knee. I gathered the first aid kit, wetting a cloth with antiseptic. Leo winced as I cleaned the cut on his lip, but he didn't pull away. "Why doesn't Dad believe me?" Leo asked, his voice hollow, devoid of hope. "Why does he love her more than me?" I stopped, holding his chin gently. "He doesn't love her more, Leo. Your father is a man drowning in grief. When your mother died 3 years ago, it broke him in ways he never repaired. He didn't heal, he just covered the wound. Isabella knows that. She is a predator who sensed blood in the water. She is feeding on his weakness, using his loneliness against him." Leo looked down at his hands, his knuckles white. "She said she's going to get rid of me. I heard her on the phone yesterday. I was in the hallway, and the door was cracked. She was talking to a man. A man? I pressed. Who? She called him Gavin. She said, "The brat is almost out of the picture. Once he's gone, we sell the company, dump the husband, and retire to the Caymans." I froze. The antiseptic bottle hovered in midair. "Are you certain, Leo?" "Yes." And she said something else. She said, "We'll do it just like we did in Phoenix." Phoenix. The word hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. "Go to bed, Leo," I said, kissing his forehead. "Sleep in the guest room. I'll be right here. I promise you, no one will hurt you tonight." Once he was asleep, I didn't go to bed. I went to my study, a room lined with floor-to-ceiling law books and memories of cases won and lost. I sat at my mahogany desk, the leather cool under my fingertips, and opened my laptop. Phoenix, Isabella Thorne, or whatever her name was back then. I dialed a number I hadn't used in 5 years. It rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Maggie Vance. I thought you were dead or playing bridge in Florida." "Hello, Saul," I said. Saul Berkowitz was the best private investigator in the Midwest. He was cynical, expensive, drank too much bourbon, and had a mind like a steel trap. "I need a background check, Saul. A deep dive. A woman named Isabella Thorne, currently married to my son, claims to be from Old Money in Connecticut. And you think she's actually from the gutter?" "I think she's a black widow, Saul." She mentioned Phoenix, and a man named Gavin. I need to know who she was before she sank her claws into Jonathan. I need to know who she was in Phoenix. "I'll get on it. But Maggie, it's 4 a.m. This sounds personal." "It is," I replied, staring at the snow falling against the glass. "It's the most important case of my life." The next 3 days were a blur of strategy and caretaking. Leo's eye turned a gruesome shade of yellow and green, but his spirit began to mend. We really talked for the first time in years. He told me about the psychological warfare Isabella had waged. The missing items blamed on him, the gaslighting, the whispers to Jonathan that Leo was stealing money, the slow isolation of my son from his friends and family. On the 3rd morning, Saul arrived. He looked disheveled, wearing a trench coat that had seen better decades. He sat at my kitchen table and laid out a file that was thick enough to be a novel. "You were right, Maggie," Saul said, taking a sip of black coffee. "Her name isn't Isabella Thorne, it's Jessica Miller, born in a trailer park in Ohio. She's got a rap sheet that was sealed, but I have friends in low places." He spread out photographs. Mugshots from 10 years ago. A younger, harder version of Isabella stared back. Her eyes were the same cold, dead, calculating. "She reinvents herself every few years," Saul explained, pointing to a timeline he had drawn. 10 years ago, she was in Phoenix. Jessica Miller. She married a real estate developer named Arthur Pym. He was 50, a widower, vulnerable. 6 months in, he died of a sudden cardiac event. She inherited $2 million. "And the autopsy?" I asked, scanning the documents. "Inconclusive. But here's the kicker. She had a partner, a lawyer named Gavin Reed. He handled the estate. He made sure the children from the first marriage got nothing." Leo's words echoed in my mind. She was talking to a man named Gavin. "There's more," Saul continued. 3 years ago, she was in Denver. Name, Vanessa Cole. Married a tech CEO. He didn't die, but he had a severe skiing accident that left him with permanent brain damage. She got power of attorney, liquidated his assets, and put him in a state facility. Gavin Reed handled the paperwork. "She's a parasite," I whispered, nausea rising in my throat. "She finds vulnerable, wealthy men, isolates them from their families, and then drains them dry." "And now she has Jonathan," Saul said grimly. "And Leo is the obstacle. As long as the kid is around, she can't fully control the assets or isolate Jonathan completely. That's why she staged the assault. She needs Leo gone, incarcerated, or emancipated, so she can move to the final phase." I looked at the photos of the ruined men. My son was next. "We have to go to the police," Leo said, standing in the doorway. He had been listening, his face pale. "With what?" I asked gently. "A sealed juvenile record from another state? Coincidences?" "She's smart, Leo. She covers her tracks. We need concrete proof. We need a confession or physical evidence that connects her to a crime here, now. We need the brass sculpture, Leo said. The one she hit me with. I looked at him. What about it? She didn't clean it right away, Leo said, his voice gaining strength. She threw it in the back of the hallway closet under some blankets because the police arrived so fast. She probably thinks she'll clean it later when the heat dies down, or maybe she kept it to plant it in my room later. If that sculpture still has your blood and her fingerprints on the handle, that's assault with a deadly weapon, I mused. That's forensic evidence that destroys her story of self-defense. But we can't get a warrant based on a hunch, and if we ask Jonathan to look, she'll know. I have to go back, Leo said. No, absolutely not. It's too dangerous. Grandma, it's the only way. Dad called me this morning. He left a voicemail. He wants me to come by to pick up some clothes and talk. He sounds broken. He says Isabella is out at the spa for the afternoon. If I go now, I can get into the closet. I looked at Saul. He chewed on a toothpick, thinking. I can wire him up, Maggie, audio and video, high definition. We'll be in the van right outside. If she shows up, if anything feels wrong, we bust in. I hated it. Every instinct in my body screamed to keep Leo safe in my apartment behind deadbolts. But I looked at the young man. He was becoming brave, resilient, willing to fight for his father, and I realized I had to trust him. Okay, I said, my voice tight. But we do this my way. The plan was precise. Saul equipped Leo with a button camera on his jacket and a microscopic earpiece. We parked Saul's nondescript van 2 houses down from Jonathan's sprawling Victorian mansion in Lincoln Park. The snow had stopped, leaving the world bright and blindingly white. I watched the monitor, my heart hammering against my ribs as Leo walked up the driveway. He looked small against the imposing architecture of the house. He keyed in the code. The door opened. The house was silent. Clear, Leo whispered. Go straight to the closet, I instructed through the headset. Do not go upstairs. Do not stop for anything. On the screen, I saw the familiar foyer of my son's house. It was cold, pristine, devoid of the warmth it had when his first wife was alive. Leo moved to the closet under the stairs. He opened the door and began rummaging through the piled winter blankets. I see it, Leo hissed. The camera focused. There, wrapped in a cashmere throw, was the heavy brass sculpture, an abstract modernist piece. Dark, dried stains marred the polished surface. Don't touch it with your bare hands, Saul warned. Put it in the bag. We need to preserve the prints. Leo pulled out a plastic evidence bag we had given him. He carefully maneuvered the sculpture inside. Got it, he said. I'm leaving. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the camera lens. A voice, smooth as silk and cold as ice, cut through the audio feed. Leaving so soon, Leo? I thought we were going to have a family chat. My blood froze. Isabella. She wasn't at the spa. It was a trap. I watched on the screen as the camera panned up. Isabella was leaning against the doorframe, wearing a silk robe, holding a glass of white wine. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile of a shark spotting a seal. Where's Dad? Leo asked, stepping back, clutching the bag. Oh, honey, Daddy is at the office. I sent that voicemail from his phone. I knew you'd come sneaking back like a rat looking for cheese. You're so predictable. Saul's hand hovered over the door handle of the van. Wait, he murmured. Let her talk. We need the admission. If we go in now, it's just trespassing. We need her to incriminate herself. Isabella took a sip of wine, savoring the terror on Leo's face. What do you have in that bag? The weapon you used to attack me? Or perhaps something you're stealing to sell for drugs? I'm taking the evidence, Leo said, his voice shaking but defiant. The sculpture you hit me with. It has my blood and your fingerprints. Isabella laughed, a harsh, jagged sound that echoed in the empty hallway. You poor, stupid boy. Do you really think anyone cares? Your father is mine. I own him. I own this house. And soon, I'll own everything he has. Why do you hate us? Leo asked. Why are you doing this? Hate? I don't hate you, Leo. You're just debris. You're in the way. I have a plan, you see. Gavin and I have worked very hard. Phoenix was practice. Denver was a warm-up. But this? This is the big league. Your father's company is worth millions. Once he signs the power of attorney over to me, which he will, because he's so distraught over his drug-addict son Gavin, we'll liquidate the assets. And Dad? Leo whispered. Tragic accidents happen to sad, lonely men, Isabella said breezily. An overdose of sleeping pills, perhaps. Or a fall. Grief makes people clumsy. And you? You'll be in a reform school in Utah, forgotten. She took a step toward him. Now, give me the bag. Leo backed away. No. Isabella's face twisted. The mask was gone completely now. She looked feral, ugly in her rage. She reached into the pocket of her robe and pulled out a taser. The crackle of electricity buzzed through our speakers like angry hornets. Give it to me, or I'll fry you and tell the police you attacked me again. This time, I'll make sure it looks like self-defense with a knife. I'll put the knife in your hand after you're unconscious. Go! I screamed. Saul threw the van door open. We sprinted toward the house, slipping on the icy pavement. I didn't feel the cold. I didn't feel my age. I felt only the primal need to protect my blood. Inside, on the monitor, I saw Leo dodge as Isabella lunged. She was fast, but he was younger. He scrambled over the sofa, putting furniture between them. You little wretch, she screamed. Stop running. We burst through the front door, just as Isabella cornered Leo by the fireplace. She raised the taser, her face contorted in a mask of pure malice. Drop it, Saul yelled, drawing his licensed firearm and aiming it squarely at her chest. Police! Drop the weapon! Isabella spun around, eyes wide with shock. She saw Saul, the gun, and then she saw me. Margaret? She stammered, the color draining from her face. I stepped forward, breathless but standing tall, channeling every ounce of authority I had ever possessed. It's over, Jessica. Or is it Vanessa? We have everything. The audio, the video, the background on Gavin Reed. It's all over. Isabella looked from me to Saul, her mind racing, calculating odds. She lowered the taser slowly, then smirked, trying to regain her composure. It's inadmissible, she scoffed. You entered without a warrant. I'll sue you for breaking and entering. I'll ruin you. I pulled out my phone. I just sent the live stream to the cloud, to my server, and to Detective Miller's personal email. And as for entering, this is Leo's residence. He invited us in. At that moment, the front door opened again. Jonathan stood there, keys in hand, looking confused and terrified. He looked at the gun, the taser, his mother, and his wife. What is going on? He asked, his voice trembling. Isabella instantly dropped the taser and fell to her knees, sobbing. It was instantaneous, a transformation so jarring it was almost impressive. Jonathan, thank God they broke in. Your mother brought a hitman. Leo tried to kill me again. He has a knife. Jonathan took a step toward her, his instinct to comfort kicking in. He looked at me with betrayal in his eyes. Mom? How could you? Don't you dare, Jonathan, I said, my voice cutting like a whip. He stopped. Look at her, Jonathan. Really look at her. Stop seeing what you want to see and see what is there. I signaled to Saul. He holstered his weapon but kept his hand near it. He pulled out his tablet and played the video from 2 minutes ago. Isabella's voice filled the room, amplified and undeniable. Your father is mine. I own him. Tragic accidents happen to sad, lonely men. Jonathan watched the screen. He watched the woman he loved describe how she planned to murder him and discard his son. He watched her lunge at Leo with a taser. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashen. He looked at Isabella, who was now silent, her face hard as stone, realizing the act was futile. Is this true? Jonathan whispered. Isabella stood up, brushing the dust off her knees. She didn't beg. She didn't apologize. She looked at him with pure contempt, stripping away the last layer of her disguise. You were pathetic, Jonathan. So easy. A grieving man is the easiest mark in the world. You practically handed me the keys to the vault. I was bored to death listening to you whine about your dead wife, but the money was going to be sweet. Jonathan staggered back as if physically struck. He looked at Leo, the bruise on his eye, the fear in his stance. He looked at the brass sculpture in the bag. "I'm so sorry, Leo," Jonathan choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Oh God, I'm so sorry." The police sirens wailed in the distance. Detective Miller had received the email. The legal battle that followed was not swift, nor was it easy. People like Isabella and Gavin, whom the FBI picked up at O'Hare Airport trying to board a flight to Zurich, do not go down without a fight. I didn't prosecute the case myself. That would have been a conflict of interest. But I was there every step of the way. I sat in the war room with the district attorney, laying out the connections between Phoenix, Denver, and Chicago. I helped prepare the witnesses. I helped Saul track down the daughter of Arthur Pym, the man from Phoenix, who flew in to testify about how Isabella had destroyed her family. The trial of the state of Illinois versus Jessica Miller and Gavin Reed was the sensation of the Chicago legal circuit. The courtroom was packed every day. Isabella's defense was vicious. They tried to paint Leo as a troubled, drug-addicted teen who had entrapped her. They tried to paint me as a senile, vindictive mother-in-law. But the evidence was a mountain they could not climb. The climax of the trial came when Jonathan took the stand. He was a different man than the one I had seen at the police station. He was thinner, sober, and somber. "Mr. Vance," the defense attorney asked, "didn't you tell police on the night of the incident that you believed your wife?" "I did," Jonathan said, his voice clear. "Because I was a fool. Because I was a man who was so afraid of being alone that I let a monster into my house and let her hurt my son. It is the greatest regret of my life." When the jury returned the verdict, guilty on all counts, including attempted murder, fraud, and aggravated assault, Isabella didn't cry. She simply stared at me across the courtroom. I stared back. I didn't smile. There is no joy in seeing human depravity exposed, only relief that it has been contained. The judge sentenced her to 40 years in a federal penitentiary. Gavin received 25. 6 months later, summer had finally come to Chicago. The brutal winter was a memory, replaced by the humid warmth of July. The air smelled of the lake and blooming gardens. I sat on the stone terrace of my son's house in Lincoln Park. It was different now. The cold, sterile decorations Isabella had chosen were gone. The beige furniture had been replaced with comfortable leather. There were photos on the mantelpiece again, photos of Jonathan's late wife, photos of Leo, photos of us. The house felt lived in. It felt safe. Jonathan and Leo were in the yard, throwing a baseball back and forth. It was a simple act, a cliché of father-son bonding, but to me, it was a miracle. I watched them laugh, saw Jonathan ruffle Leo's hair, saw the easy camaraderie that was slowly, painfully rebuilding the bridge between them. It wasn't perfect. There were still days of guilt for Jonathan, dark days where he would stare into space, haunted by how close he had come to losing everything. There were days of nightmares for Leo, flinching at sudden movements. Trust is a fragile thing. Once broken, it takes a lifetime to glue back together. But the cracks were where the light got in. Leo jogged up to the terrace, sweating and smiling. He grabbed a glass of lemonade from the table. "Hey, Grandma," he said, wiping his forehead. "Hey, kid." He sat down beside me, watching his father across the lawn. Jonathan was tending to the grill, looking content. "Do you think he'll ever fully forgive himself?" Leo asked quietly. I sipped my iced tea, looking at my son. "Forgiveness is a journey, Leo, not a destination. He's working on it. The important thing is that he learned the lesson." He woke up. "What lesson?" I looked at my grandson, his face healing, the bruise long gone, his eyes bright with a future that almost wasn't. "That family isn't just about blood, Leo. It's about protection. It's about standing up for each other when the world tries to tear you down. And most importantly, it's about knowing that love should never blind you to the truth. Love should help you see clearly." Leo nodded, absorbing the words. "You saved us, Grandma. You know that, right? I squeezed his hand. I just did what grandmothers do. Jonathan waved at us, holding up a spatula. Burgers are ready. Come on, Grandma, Leo said, standing up and offering me his hand. Let's eat. I took his hand, feeling the strength in it. The winter was over. The ice had melted. And as I walked out onto the green grass, surrounded by the people I had fought to save, I knew that this moment of peace, this laughter ringing in the summer air, was the greatest victory of my career. The Iron Lady could finally rest, for the wolves had been chased away, and the pack was safe.